of relief for the Detroit Three tonight.
But it may only be temporary. President Trump is giving U.S. automakers a break for 1 month.
It gives them a little time to plan for dealing with the expected impact of 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico.
7 News Detroit reporter Brett Cast tells us what industry players are saying tonight, including auto workers who support Trump's tariffs.
Donald J. Trump.
On nearly every campaign stop in Metro Detroit, Donald Trump pledged to usher in large tariffs on foreign products. Now as president, the threat of a 25% tariff between Canada and Mexico is very real.
There's been a lot of promises made and a lot of promises kept.
The promise of tariffs is what sold auto workers like Jeff Booth and his coworker Brendan Fluger. But just as the tariffs were set to kick in, the White House delayed them for another month for automakers after a push from the big three.
I actually support that so he can actually work with the automakers and then he can work with the union and see what's the best plan to bring the most jobs to America. Using the 25% tariff on, let's say, Canada and Mexico, that's just a negotiating.
Have warned the massive tariffs could severely and negatively impact the companies. So too could the back and forth. Mish Auto calls that day-to-day uncertainty debilitating, saying despite the pause, damage has already been done. But the UAW is supporting the tariffs, saying in part, quote, "We are glad to see an American president take aggressive action on ending the free trade disaster that has dropped like a bomb on the working class." Auto workers who support Trump still believe that this plan will have a long-term benefit.
The sun shines after the storm, you know. So there may be a little bit of a storm right now. The tariffs, that's just putting Mexico and Canada back into check.
A day like today, our members are feeling really uneasy, in auto, here in Oshawa especially. The last couple of decades, our members have been through a lot, whether it be plant closures, financial crisis, loss of shift, loss of product allocation in 2019. We've been through quite a bit here in Oshawa, and this is something that we feel like is out of our control to a degree, and it's making us very uneasy. On our truck, say here in Oshawa, the average part would cross the border between 6 and 8 times before final assembly of that truck going down the line. So the integration process over the last few decades especially, has really become very complex. And we work with, the United States and Mexico and in the supply chain to make sure that all the parts arrive on time and go into the trucks at the exact moment they're supposed to be there. So any type of disruption in that chain has an immediate impact.
We've gathered all of our auto and auto parts leadership across Ontario to come and plan and discuss the latest developments with the trade war with the United States. Anyone who thinks that this 30-day reprieve that Trump gave the auto sector is an actual reprieve needs to give their heads a shake. It's the exact opposite of that. He's directed the automakers, the people who employ our members here in Canada, to take 30 days and come back to him with a plan to figure out how they will invest more in the United States and potentially shift production from Canada and Mexico to the United States. This is very dangerous time right now. There's so much at stake and so much at risk. But I can guarantee you that if they think that they can appease Trump by shifting production out of Canada, there's going to be a massive, massive fight in this country. If companies think that they can shift production out of Canada and then just import things back to Canada without facing massive penalties and massive tariffs, they've got another thing coming. This is the reality of the situation we're in. We didn't go looking for this fight, but we have to protect our jobs and our industries and our country right now. And auto jobs are right up there, and they're the first that Trump is coming for. But ultimately, we are workers, and we are a workers' union. And what that means is we may have to take workers' action in order to make sure that we're protecting our jobs and our industry and our country for not just for today, but for the next generation. And we're willing to do all of that. We will have to do all of that.
This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek. And this past week, there have been the institution of tariffs against Mexico and Canada, as well as China. And these tariffs have created havoc in all countries and in China as well. And also it's affected workers. And we're going to talk today about how it's affected particularly auto workers with the integration of NAFTA and USMCA in the production of automobiles. in Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And joining us today are Tony Leah. He is with Unifor Local 222, General Motors in Oshawa, Canada. And also Jessie Kelley with UAW 160, General Motors at Warren, and is also a member of UAWD. And Frank Hammer, who is a former president of UAW 909 and also is in UAWD. Welcome to our show.
Hi, Steve.
Thank you.
So, Tony, you're in Canada, you were at a GM plant. How is this affecting workers in Canada, and what does it mean for Canadian workers as far as this tariff imposition by the Trump administration?
Well, the first thing is that it's created unbelievable anxiety amongst workers, uncertainty about what's going to happen. The expectation has been floated around by quite a few people that if the tariffs had been implemented, that plants would have been shut within a week. The supply chain would have been disrupted. But it's also absolutely clear that a 25% tariff on export of vehicles would mean that a pickup truck built in Oshawa would be hit with a probably $15,000 tariff to go across the border to the United States. And that wasn't going to happen. GM's not going to pay that. They're going to shut down before they do that. So it really has hit workers hard. They want to resist, they want to fight back, but I think it's also created a lot of uncertainty about how to go about that, because the immediate reaction people feel is they want to defend their jobs. And the worst thing that could happen is if workers feel that they have to fight each other for the jobs, because then the corporations are sitting back and they're the ones that benefit.
Well, NAFTA was supposed to bring jobs to America and make it better for American workers. The reality for workers in the United States was it was used to downsize, to outsource jobs to Mexico, and workers were threatened that if they didn't take concessions, they would lose their jobs. Jessie, what's been the effect in General Motors in your plant?
Yeah, so I think right now we haven't even seen the full consequences of these actions yet. And so my fear is that although we're not seeing it right now, we're going to see a lot of unintended consequences, even though I do believe that this is a game of chicken. And it's hard for me to understand how long they plan on doing this, if they do this at all. But there will always be unintended consequences. And those are going to look like really hurting the working class altogether. One of the biggest consequences I think we're going to see on the immediate end, to Tony's point, is just the breakdown in solidarity across borders with workers just like us. And we need to rely on those workers in order for us to even get good contracts at home, because unless you liberate the whole entire working class, these companies are always going to find ways to exploit each other and to pit us against each other to end up the victor in the end. So that's going to be, I think, the most immediate and the most devastating consequence on the front end of this. And then I think on the back end of this, we're just going to see just a lot of hostility, car prices raise that will go down to the consumers. I think that there's going to be so much uncertainty with these markets that the companies are just automatically going to be looking for places to go where they're going to be able to exploit workers with lower tariffs that aren't the US, aren't Mexico, and aren't Canada. And I think that will hurt us all too.
And has there been any reaction of supporters of Trump who voted for Trump in the UAW?
Yeah, I mean, it's an unfortunate reality. I think we have a lot of political education to do around a lot of different topics, especially in the UAW. The most devastating to me is that our own international union came out in a statement in support of these tariffs. And I think it's because for so long, NAFTA has been used as a means to weaponize workers against each other. And when you're really short-sighted And when you don't understand that when you're dealing with global companies, if you don't have global solidarity, if you're not fighting this globally, you'll always lose. But so the short-sighted vision of this is to be mad, at NAFTA and to then allow this division to occur with workers in these other countries and these, invisible borders. And I think that we have a very, very short-sighted vision right now. And I was very upset with that statement. I know a lot of workers were upset, and a lot of workers were happy with that statement. They do naturally believe that tariffs are going to be the answer to save their jobs. And it's really unfortunate because I don't believe that that's the answer. I think these companies will continue to exploit wherever they can. Short-sighted, not well thought out tariffs without the goal of liberating the middle class will never be successful.
Thank you. And the USMCA was negotiated, in fact, by Trump, saying it was a great victory for workers. Frank, what happened? Why is all of a sudden Trump now saying that he's going to dump the USMCA and institute tariffs against Canada and Mexico?
I just want to remind people, and I want to take them back to when the USMCA was negotiated. And this was Trump's supposed, trumping NAFTA, right? And he said at the time, I will say that we just ended a nightmare known as NAFTA. They took our jobs for a long time. And we now have a brand new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. It's a whole different ballgame. And it's going to be great for this plant. He was talking at a Dana manufacturing facility. It's going to be incredible for Michigan and for every place, everywhere else in our country. The USMCA is the fairest, most balanced, and beneficial trade agreement we've ever signed into law. I mean, this is the rhetoric that was wrapped around that trade agreement. And you can see now that Trump is going to, whatever he does with the tariffs, he's going to wrap the same wrap around this rotten to the core agreement that will fool, unfortunately, some of the auto workers. But I think that it's time for auto workers to realize that he's just sugarcoating doing something on behalf of the capitalist class. And he's trying to sell it in a way that he sold the USMCA, and all of a sudden the USMCA, well, it's not so good anymore. Oh, well, what are we going to do now? So I think that I'm in agreement with Jessie and Tony that the UAW and the labor movement as a whole has got to completely take a different orientation to what's being promoted, certainly by the Trump's reactionary folks in the White House and in the Congress.
And the United States believes it can't compete with China with automobiles, as well as Europe can't compete with China. China is the largest producer of automobiles, EV vehicles. This trade war isn't part of a global crisis of capitalism. I mean, where companies and countries fight each other for survival. That's really what's going on.
I think that you're right, that the idea that what we really have to look at, I think, is what is going to strengthen workers and what is going to strengthen the corporations that we're battling with. If we think that we have common interests with corporations, we're clearly not going to get anywhere. They have the upper hand, and this kind of a trade war mentality is strengthening the hands of the corporations. And what's missing is any actions that are being taken by the labor movement to strengthen our relationship with other workers internationally. We end up in a crisis like this, and we don't have contact between the labor movement in the United States, in Canada, and Mexico. And that's the first thing that, as workers, that we should want to happen. We should want to be able to get together as workers and talk about what the issues are, find our common interests, and figure out what our response should be, rather than starting to identify workers in other countries as the enemy, because that's part of what I see happening. And that's where tariffs become divisive and corrosive to the labor movement. You mentioned, Steve, tariffs against China. And I was struck by the fact that last year, the leadership of my union supported tariffs against China, supported 100% tariff against vehicle imports from China. And then when it gets turned around against them and there's tariffs introduced on Canada, they are, you know, inflamed about it. And I think that rightly they're inflamed about what the consequences are going to be, but they don't seem to recognize that they've played into that to some extent. And this has been going on a long time. This is really deeply ingrained, unfortunately, in workers in North America to feel that their answer is to have tariff barriers and to keep jobs and without any consideration for workers in other countries. I did want to mention, if I can take a minute, that we went through a round of threatened plant closures, particularly at GM, 6 years ago. And my plant was threatened along with the Detroit Hamtramck plant and Warren plant and others in the U.S. And there was a remarkable demonstration in Detroit at the Detroit International Auto Show that included some workers from Canada, because the members of my local supported the demands of that demonstration, which was if GM walks away from the plant, seize it and use it for beneficial purposes. That's the way to maintain jobs. And there were a lot of workers there from UAW, from U.S. plants, and there were workers there from Brazil, GM workers from Brazil. That was an incredible eye-opening experience, because it pointed out to me where the real positive direction should be for workers. And yet here we are, 6 years later, and we're being threatened again. And there's no direct contact between auto workers in Canada and auto workers in Mexico, auto workers in the United States. That's where we should be starting out, I believe.
And Jessie, do you think if Shawn Fain had made that call instead of welcoming Trump's imposition of tariffs, made a call for unity of Mexican, Canadian, and U.S. workers, there would have been a response from auto workers in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have been an appropriate call. And I think that, we have signaled in the past in other actions that we've done at the International Union that this isn't something that would be shocking to anybody. This would be very in line with the principles that we have shown under the new administration for the International Union. So I think that it would have been a great and appropriate call. That's, again, why it's just so disappointing to see this kind of change in narrative. And I think it is really important call to make. And what will happen, I think, ultimately is, although we know that some of the auto workers inside of America voted for Trump, and probably a large number of those people, when this blows back, if this happens to be a tariff war, if layoffs occur, if it goes on long enough, layoffs are the reality. If layoffs occur and the consumer is the one that is taking on all of the extra cost of these tariffs, and they've just lost their jobs and they can't afford groceries and they can't afford the car that they used to build, they're going to be looking for other places for the answer. And that's why it would have been, I think, really important to have that answer now, of global solidarity, of liberating the working class, of all of us coming together, because eventually the people that are attracted to this messaging today are going to be looking for a different answer when it doesn't work out. And we know it doesn't work out. We've seen it 100 times, that the consumer is always the one that hurts. The working class is always the one to suffer the biggest blows when things don't go the way that they're intended to. I wish it was a different statement, so that there was something out there to attract those people that will be looking for a different route.
And you as well have been, I understand, fighting many years against contracting out you're a contract worker. So this effort of contracting out is also an attack on the working class.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just they're really creative and they're really good, and they've had decades and decades of experience of how to divide the working class. And this is just one of, a drop in the bucket of the many tactics they've used to do this. And that's with contract companies, that's with third-party divisions, that's with calling us temps or LLCs or tiers, or the hundreds of ways that they've demonstrated to just be able to give you a new label and then divide us so that we are never strong enough to take them on. And these imaginary borders right now are exactly just another tactic to do that.
So you're saying the borders are basically just being used to pit worker against worker?
Yeah, and I mean, if this continues for long enough, it's even in 2 more decades from now, it's not like the whipsawing is going to stop. I mean, we are dealing with these tariffs being called by the same exact man that said, just send those jobs down south and pay those workers less, and then it will go full circle, and the workers in Michigan will be begging for their jobs back. So this isn't the answer, because what's going to happen right now is we're being whipsawed against Mexico, and in 20 years, when we have stronger tariffs, we'll just be whipsawed against Georgia. I mean, it will always be this narrative until we all collectively come together and fight.
And of course, as we talked earlier, NAFTA was used by companies to basically deindustrialize the Midwest. I mean, millions of workers lost their jobs. It was a bipartisan policy of the Democrats and Republicans. Wasn't Clinton the guy that pushed NAFTA through? And I remember being at a UAW convention where Clinton told the convention, it was in San Diego, he actually told the convention, I'm going to support NAFTA and you're going to take it, whether you like it or not. This is a UAW convention. I mean, just telling them, and they were clapping him. And I said, what is going on?
And this is what I mean when I say sometimes when we talk about the consequences of an action, we're not even fully sure the consequences of the action until so many years later. And these little tiny things that you see happen in like the Republican Party or the Democratic Party has intended consequences. And I would say that Trump is unintended consequence of the Democratic Party not sticking up for the working class 3-4 decades ago.
I want to come back to the signs of the solidarity, like what Tony was talking about. And I think we might have all been at that demonstration in 2019, which showed solidarity. And what was really interesting is that demonstration was initiated by a number of political groups in Detroit, including the Auto Worker Caravan, and the UAW at that time was about a quarter mile away trying to hold a prayer vigil. And this massive mobilization that we did and incorporated Brazil and incorporated Canadian Unifor members was a fantastic show of solidarity. And I want to add a note to that. And in 2019, when the UAW members here and at my plant and at the Detroit plant and throughout GM went on strike, including at Local 160, there were workers in the Mexican truck plant in Silao who, unbeknownst to the workers on strike in the US, were taking actions in solidarity with the US workers, and nobody ever hears that. And as workers there, at the truck plant, they were increasing production, they were increasing the speed of the line, they were mandating overtime to compensate for the US workers who were out fighting for their jobs and fighting to end two-tier. And some of those workers got fired. And the only way we got to know about it was that we had a Latino Workers Leadership Institute an annual conference, and we had a Skype call with the workers in Mexico, with the men and the women who worked at the plant, with about 100 UAW members in the audience in the US. And the technology would enable us to build the kind of solidarity that we so desperately need across borders. And we have the technology to do it. And instead, we go back into the same old, same old. We're going to fight for the US jobs, and we're going to bring them back from Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. It's a losing strategy, and there's no clarity as to why the UAW would once again get on that boat.
Well, the IAM has opposed the tariffs. They have a group in Canada. They represent workers in Canada, and they've come out. The AFL-CIO has even come out against this tariff trade war, considering that for the last 30 years, 40 years, the integration of production of automobiles with parts and everything else requires that there be an exchange between U.S. production, Canadian production, and Mexico production. So wouldn't this effect of these tariffs actually wreck the industries on all sides of the border? It seems like insanity.
It certainly does. It would cause immense disruption. I don't know how long, but or if it's even going to happen, because it's as Jessie mentioned, it's pretty hard to figure out what Trump's game plan actually is. But tariffs in the auto industry in North America would be immensely disruptive because of the integration. But we also have to recognize that the way that the industry is structured now is been to the benefit of the corporations. It's not to the benefit of workers. That integration has allowed the maximum profitability of the corporations and their control over everything. They make the decisions. So my plant in Oshawa, it's General Motors that decides whether there's investment in it or not. And they can change that decision anytime they want to if they think it's better for their profits. We don't have any control over that. Workers don't have any control over it. That's why we're vulnerable to being played off against each other. If tariffs mean that more jobs move to the United States, isn't it most likely that those jobs will end up in right-to-work states or non-union plants? Because that will be how they would maximize their profits. So, the tariffs in and of themselves aren't going to make workers stronger or determine which workers are going to keep jobs. And that's why I think we need a broader outlook as a class, workers as a class. How are we going to be able to exercise more power and greater control over our lives and our countries instead of leaving it in the hands of corporations?
And Jessie, is that what you feel as well?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that was like my immediate, thought and response when I was reading the UAW statement was it's just so wild to me to believe that this is going to somehow, uplift the working class when this is being directed by the ultra wealthy. And trust me, Elon Musk and Trump are not sitting in their office figuring out how to make more good working class jobs. They're in their office trying to figure out how they can rein in more power through this chaos and through this confusion, and how, them and their ultra wealthy friends can capitalize off of this more and more. Like, this has nothing to do with us. We're going to suffer for every single decision that's being made right now. And he's even telling people, Trump is actively saying, people are going to have to take the sacrifices now. And what it will lead to is more American jobs. So I guess my question to the American people is, if you're going to suffer for the next 3 years, wouldn't you like to suffer in a way that at the end of the day is going to benefit you? Not suffer for 3 years and then still be enslaved to corporations and still be enslaved to the ultra wealthy to live paycheck to paycheck? I would just rather make the next 3 years of sacrifice look like exactly what Tony's saying, where, we seize the means of control. We have more say as the working class over our jobs, over where these products are being built, over what that looks like for us, over where investments go. I would much rather, suffer with that end goal than to suffer with, either the same or worse than what we have right now. And that's where we're going.
Well, wouldn't that require, though, a kind of a political revolution? Because both parties, the Democrats and Republicans, are controlled by these same billionaires who really benefit from getting rid of workers, like with AI. Unregulated, the introduction of AI is being brought in to get rid of workers to make more profits. Isn't that really what's driving all this investment in AI, is to get rid of workers so they can increase their profit rate?
Yeah. And honestly, technology as a whole, AI is a giant part of that, but technology in a whole, before we had AI, we had robots taking, factory jobs. And until everybody starts benefiting from the advancements in technology in this society, we're just going to continue to widen the gap between the people that are forced out of that and the people that benefit from that. And that's why we are seeing this just, this large gap, and we have billionaires compared to people that can't even afford to eat or can't afford their rent. And that's just going to get wider and wider until we all together, because there's more of us than there is of them, come together collectively and we say we're all going to start advancing from these kinds of things. And we're going to resist, and we're going to organize, and we're going to even come up with like a whole nother working class party until we get what we need. And yeah, I think that will ultimately have to be the answer. And I hope people realize that and take steps towards that.
Well, also, of course, the rise of fascism and the attack on immigrants. I mean, immigrants are in the factories. Immigrants are in our fields. I mean, they're the ones that are doing the work, and they're being blamed, pitting the immigrants against other workers. I mean, it really is madness and dangerous, poisonous to people in this country to be pitted against each other when the billionaires are the ones taking advantage of that, as you're saying. Now, Tony, there has been a rise of nationalism in Canada, removing alcohol, saying they're not going to go to Florida. What is going on in Canada as far as what Canadians think about what Trump is doing and the United States is doing in relationship to these tariffs?
The popular mood is uniformly appalled by the actions of Trump and his government, and people are eager to find ways to resist. They're eager to oppose what's happening. I think that so far the response has been things like you've mentioned, like not buying American manufactured items, and putting tariffs on some American goods, not drinking American whiskey, and those things are relatively short-term, low-level ways of resistance. What I would like to see encouraged is a more thoughtful response, which is if the government of the United States can threaten this kind of economic harm to workers in Canada and Mexico and other countries as part of an announced objective of annexation of our country, turning Canada into a 51st state, I think that Canadians should ask themselves, why do we have a military alliance with this country which is threatening a coercive takeover of our country? Our military shouldn't be under their control if that's how they're going to threaten us. I think Canada should pull out of NATO. I think Canada should recognize that they shouldn't be backing U.S. foreign policy in promoting wars and aggression around the world, and take an independent foreign policy based on peace and an end to arms sales. That would be a more thoughtful response to the threats that we're seeing from the U.S. government, in my opinion. I do want to mention one positive thing that my union has announced, and I have my criticisms of a number of their policies, but they announced yesterday that if there are any plants where equipment or machinery is being taken out as a result of the tariff threats, that they're calling on workers to prevent that from happening and asking the government of Canada to support them. And I think that's a really interesting idea. And I think they should go even farther than that and say that if a company is going to be shut down as a result of this tariff crisis, that should be grounds for workers taking it over and repurposing it and using it for something more socially useful than maybe it's being used for now. And that could be part of a much broader working class movement. So if we're looking for ways to build resistance in a meaningful way, I think that's part of the direction we should be looking at.
Well, Frank, has there been any initiative yet? I know there's debate in UAWD, Unite All Workers for Democracy, but has there been any initiative to say, let's get workers, all auto workers together in Mexico, the United States, and Canada, and let's start working together against these multinationals, against the billionaires who want us to be pitted against each other?
Yeah, I think that the short answer is there is that sentiment and movement in the grassroots movement that UAWD represents, and I think the messaging is very, very important, because I think that there's an underlying resentment in the working class and among auto workers against what they call the globalists, which is what's brought us to this point. And the answer that Trump is promoting is America First nationalism. Both are zeros for the working class. We need to promote internationalism, and that's not on the agenda. We're the ones that have to put that on the agenda. And the examples that we were giving earlier are things in that direction. And I think that UAWD has been a pretty strong force for advocating internationalism. We have a International Solidarity Committee that's part of UAWD. We're making connections with Mexican auto workers. There was a recent conference that included UAWD members that went to Mexico. So I think that is the direction that we need to go. And we have to say no to the globalists. We have to say no to the nationalists and say we promote internationalism as a way out for the working class.
And of course, part of the history unknown to most workers is that the AFL-CIO was involved with the CIA in Mexico in overturning a militant union in Mexico City at a Ford plant. And one worker was killed at that plant to get rid of that union leadership. There's never been an apology to the Mexican workers about the interference into their struggle. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is the whole role of Musk, because I live in the Bay Area. At the Fremont Tesla plant, they fired 700 workers who wanted to join the UAW. They were just fired. There was no requirement or no accountability of Musk at Tesla, and he actually conspired to avoid showing his injuries. He had very dangerous conditions at the plant by preventing workers from going to a hospital so they would show up as injured. The black workers there said it was like working at the plantation. There were civil rights lawsuits because of the racist atmosphere at that plant. And that's something unions can fight, discrimination, and fight for equality. So it seems like Musk being in the key force reorganizing the government, getting rid of EEOC, getting rid of any programs for equality. It's a threat not only to auto workers, but all workers, that there's going to be no regulations. And basically, the idea of these techno-billionaires, techno-fascists, is we don't need regulations. What would that mean for the working class? Not to have any protections, any regulations of health and safety. OSHA is being destroyed. I mean, all these agencies are really on the chopping block for the purpose of making capitalism more profitable from their point of view.
That's absolutely true. And the only weapon that workers have to resist that, given what's going on, is their own organization and their own determination to stand up and fight back against unsafe conditions or racism or any of the conditions that workers are facing. And that requires bolder leadership than we've seen. I'll remind people that last year, President Biden at one point referred to the AFL-CIO as my domestic NATO. And I think that's along the lines of the kind of attitude that you were referring to, Steve, where some sectors of the leadership of the labor movement are not working on behalf of the working class, but in concert with the U.S. government foreign policy aims. So we do need more aggressive leadership, more class-conscious leadership of the labor movement, more organization of workers to defend themselves. You mentioned the IAM, which did take a position against the tariffs. So did the Steelworkers Union International. Took a strong position against tariffs and said that they would hurt workers on both sides of the border. So there's some possibility of building on those and building more, but I think that at this point, an awful lot of it's going to have to come from rank and file workers mobilizing and organizing themselves to be able to exercise power on the shop floor, which is where it all starts.
And of course, there is the Solidarity Center, which the AFL-CIO operated, and they got a budget of $75 million. And Trump and Musk have shut down the National Endowment for Democracy, which was funding the Solidarity Center, quote unquote Solidarity Center. But you would think that American workers now should have a new approach, which is having direct links with workers around the world to fight together against these multinationals. That's the way really to defend workers, not fighting each other, which is what these companies have us do in most instances. Jessie, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. We are just way too busy fighting each other, and we should be really busy organizing. But just to echo a little bit, like, what is the answer? What do we do from here? It is going to rest on the rank and file workers. It's going to rest on talking to the people next to you, doing that political education, having those, tough conversations, and caring for people, even when maybe you're not in complete agreement with them, but explaining why you feel the way that you feel, because people will come around. I genuinely believe that. And they're gonna be looking for answers, and they're gonna be looking for them fast when things get more and more chaotic. And we can be an answer to that, and these rank and file movements can be an answer to that. And we have to hold our leadership accountable, and we have to get more people that, a part of a rank and file movement to eventually step up and run for these larger leadership roles, once they've established really strong political, identifications on these rank and file levels, so that they know what they're fighting when they're in those roles too. And, we just need people accountable to the working class. We need our leaders accountable to us, not accountable to politicians. And we need to stop this idea that we need a politician on our side in order to actually win anything or to achieve anything, because the answer is that when we organize, the real power is in the working class, and the real power is in the rank and file. It's not in titles or, make believe like bureaucratic structures.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of you for joining.
I'm going to add one more thing.
Okay, Frank.
So UAWD is putting action to its words, and we're beginning to mobilize for International Workers' Day on May 1st. And that's a concrete expression of the direction that working class is going to go. And the UAWD is picking up the call by UAW President Shawn Fain. He's talking about aligning contracts so that come May 2028, May 1st, that workers are prepared to walk out en masse in general strike. And we're beginning in the preparations, anchoring May Day 2025 as a beginning move in that direction. And the UAWD is going to be involved in that.
And it would seem that, May Day is an international holiday. It actually started in Chicago, and immigrant workers in Chicago fighting for an 8-hour day, which we still don't have. People have to work 2 or 3 jobs. They're on the gig economy. And it seems like the need for internationalism. And I don't know if we can wait for 2028 for a general strike, because at the rate we're going, there may not even be elections anymore. With this government. So the danger of a dictatorship, a fascist dictatorship, is really growing in this country. It seems like the survival of workers, and their view is, with the federal workers, we want to crush the unions. We don't care about their union rules. We're going to lay them off, even though they have legal protections. And if they get away with it with these federal workers, what other people are they going to go to? And I think that hasn't really been raised by the labor movement, that if they crush these federal workers, you're next.
Right.
And I don't think that's even being said by these other unions, like the IAM, like the Teamsters, like the UAW. That the survival of public worker unions is critical for the entire working class.
Right.
So it seems like May Day could be an opportunity to bring all workers together: federal workers, state workers, local, public, teachers, auto workers, all workers, in a real massive show. And actually, wouldn't that really stop this drive towards tariffs? There was a national general strike, an international general strike against trade war, because it's affecting all these countries. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us. Solidarity, and I think we have to build unity and a rank and file movement of the working class to defend ourselves. It's a very dangerous situation. So thanks for joining us on Work Week.
Thank you. Solidarity.
Thank you.